Hi everyone, my name is Ronald Denisio and I'm the Virtual Content Specialist for 7th grade Social Studies. I wanted to take the time to talk about strategies for teaching Unit 5, Day 11 and 12, Fugitive Slave Acts. The original lesson can be found in the Passports to Social Studies Plan, Unit 5, and Nation Divided on page 127. In this teacher-facing video, I will walk you through the learning activities and important considerations for teaching this lesson remotely as well as in person. Again, we will focus on Unit 5, Day 11 and 12, Fugitive Slave Acts, but the strategies discussed can be used for lots of different lessons in our curriculum. Our first slide is our teacher-facing slide that we'll delete before posting for students. It includes the title, our focus question, what were the Fugitive Slave Acts, our next generation learning standards, where we'll focus on determining the central ideas or information of a primary or secondary source, providing an accurate, objective summary of the source distinct from prior knowledge or opinions, which are our learning activities will target that specific standard. And you also have the materials and resources that we'll be using for this lesson. The excerpt from the Fugitive Slave Act of 1793, as well as 1850, which can be found in the student workbook on page 230, 231, and 232, as well as 3 videos that we have built into the 2 days of learning for students also. Prior to introducing the topic to students, it is important that you preface the lesson by discussing the difficulty of teaching and learning about slavery. Let students know that it is not a comfortable topic for anyone and that it is an awful time in the history of our nation. Make sure to remind students that they may encounter terms and primary sources that we know are not appropriate, but that are unfortunately representative of words used during this time in history. This slide also features resources from Facing History and Ourselves, as well as Learning for Justice, which offers a student-centered approach, as well as a specific framework for teaching and learning about slavery that we encourage you to read. Some of the strategies that we'll discuss for our guidance for instruction slide include student choice, modeling a think out loud, chunking the text, a jigsaw strategy, a partner read, and a small group discussion. Now, you don't have to use all of these strategies for this lesson, but this just offers a menu for you to choose from as you are thinking about designing learning activities for your students. Our lesson objective asks students to examine the Fugitive Slave Acts in the context of abolition and slavery. At this point in the year, our students have learned a lot about the enslavement era. Students were introduced to abolition at the end of Unit 4 in the 2nd grade awakening lesson and learned about abolitionists in greater detail in the 5th lesson of Unit 5. It may be helpful to call back to these lessons to activate prior knowledge for students. For our introduction and model slides, we will take some time to build the necessary background that will allow students to engage with the primary sources. Here we define the word fugitive and fugitive slave and share with students that the U.S. Congress passed 2 laws that allowed the capture and return of people who escaped slavery, one in 1793 and one in 1850. It might be helpful to ask students, why are there 2 versions of the law, one in 1793 and one in 1850? What may have been significant about those dates? We then provide students with a brief summary of the Fugitive Slave Act of 1793 and 1850. Sharing with students this slide is extremely important for students to engage with the excerpts from the Fugitive Slave Laws of 1793 and 1850. It will be helpful to remind students that they can come back to these slides if they get stuck at any time when analyzing the excerpts. You can also share with students that the Fugitive Slave Acts were very controversial laws of the early 19th century, and many northern states passed special legislation to be able to get around the laws. Eventually, both laws were repealed by Congress in 1864. Now that we have built historical context for students, they will begin to read excerpts from both Fugitive Slave Acts. We will ask students to use the triple entry journal strategy to paraphrase what they have read in their own words and make inferences about the act's impacts. Students will have the option to record their responses in the blue box on the slides. If you're back in the classroom, you can also have students recreate the triple entry journal in their social studies notebook. Students do not have to work on these excerpts alone. I would encourage students to work in partnerships or triads while reading, paraphrasing, and making inferences about the text. This is the end of part 1 of the Fugitive Slave Acts video series. Stay tuned for part 2, where we talk about modeling the excerpt from 1793 of the Fugitive Slave Act, as well as the other learning activities for the rest of day 1 and day 2 of this lesson.